Olá a todos e a todas, sejam bem-vindos e bem-vindas à Conferência Europeia da Juventude em Gaia, Portugal.
Welcome everyone. Welcome to the EU Youth Conference. This is the second conference in this cycle of the Youth Dialogue, and my name is Milos, and I'll be one of your lead facilitators in the next 4 days.
And my name is Dulio, and I will also be one of the lead facilitators together with Milos. Milos, this is quite a different setting, isn't it?
It is a different setting, but even though we had the same circumstances in the previous conference in Germany, we showed that we can create spaces online also for full participation of young people. And we are going to make sure that we do it this time again also here in Portugal, but also in all the different homes of the people that are following us live today.
And we are hosted in a venue. This venue is in Gaia in Portugal, in the north of Portugal. And despite the fact that we cannot be together, the city has prepared a message from the mayor, a video message which will be presented now, so that they can welcome us into this conference.
A abordagem à juventude, ao papel dos jovens, tem vindo a ser muitas vezes restrita a um conceito que às vezes é muito unívoco, um conceito de uma juventude, quando em bom rigor temos tentado sempre que podemos, no quadro da nossa intervenção, no quadro até da problematização do conceito, definir a juventude no plural, porque é completamente diferente, como explicava Bordier, é completamente diferente ser jovem num meio escolar e a cumprir a escolaridade obrigatória e a cumprir depois o percurso universitário, ou ser um jovem que abandona a escola e que por razões socioeconómicas tem mesmo que se envolver no mercado de trabalho de forma muito precoce. São juventudes distintas. Merecem todos o mesmo tratamento, naturalmente, mas um mesmo tratamento como objetivo, como filosofia, e diferentes abordagens do ponto de vista daquilo que são as respostas públicas, na área da formação profissional, na área dos estágios remunerados, na área das políticas de lazer, ou seja, reconhecer a diversidade do próprio conceito de juventude é um instrumento poderoso para que as políticas públicas se possam adaptar, possam ser adaptáveis a cada um dos subgrupos deste grande grupo juventude, que verdadeiramente como conceito vale a pena ser tratado no plural. E as políticas municipais têm muito esse propósito. Em geral, as políticas públicas, de âmbito nacional, de âmbito municipal, local, são instrumentos poderosos de mudança social. São as políticas públicas, muitas vezes, que induzem fatores de mudança, os apoios para a alteração legislativa, etc. E o que nós pretendemos é também, a cada momento, lembrar que o compromisso com a juventude ou com as juventudes é um compromisso para manter, reforçando laços, porque os laços do dia-a-dia, no atual momento, não só no momento pandémico, mas no atual momento, estágio deste modelo capitalista, tem vindo a quebrar laços com o mercado de trabalho, laços uns com os outros, a criar uma sociedade tendencialmente individualista, que nos leva muitas vezes para caminhos que não são os caminhos do humanismo que nós defendemos. Portanto, um trabalho empenhado, uma reflexão séria, uma reflexão aprofundada e depois caminhos, no plural, caminhos diferentes para cada uma das realidades diferentes que temos também, é a forma de termos uma sociedade mais justa, mais coesa e onde os jovens sejam verdadeiramente parte do processo de desenvolvimento e desenhadores do seu próprio futuro, coletivamente.
After listening to these welcoming and ground-setting words, I believe that all of us would like even more now to be in person. Unfortunately, that's not possible, obviously, but we'll carry on into the next speech. This time around, we have a video message from the Vice President of the European Commission, Mr. Margaritis Schinas.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, I'm delighted to participate in the European Youth Conference of the Portuguese presidency. During the next 3 days, you will work on space and participation for all in our union at local, national, and European level. I very much look forward to hearing from you, receiving the outcomes of your discussions and helping you take them forward in promoting our European way of life altogether. Youth is at the heart of the European project. This project may not be perfect, but we strive to improve it continuously for and with the next generations of Europeans. On one hand, Europe protects and empowers you. And on the other, you power the European democracy, and you will be the guardians of the values that uphold our union. A few months ago, at the height of this still ongoing pandemic, the EU has taken decisive steps for its recovery and its future. With our historic Next Generation EU initiative, we have chosen unity rather than division, solidarity rather than isolation, ambition rather than fatalism. We have drawn on the core values at the heart of the European project to come out of the pandemic together, to ensure a more symmetric recovery in all member states and to make sure that no one is left behind. This is precisely what makes our union stronger today. I know that at this very moment, the eyes of Europe's youth are turned towards their governments and towards the European Union. There is a genuine concern and growing expectations, not only about what the world of tomorrow will be like, but also very concretely about job prospects, career opportunities, your freedoms, and your place in tomorrow's society. Let me tell you that we are doing our utmost to meet these expectations and offer both girls and boys, young women and men, equal opportunities to fulfill their aspirations as individuals, as citizens, and in the labor market. For instance, with our youth employment support package, we provide at least 22 billion euros for youth employment measures. We also reinforce the youth guarantee by opening it up to the age of 29 to support more young people in school to work and early job-to-job transitions, and step up the outreach to disadvantaged young people across our union. Recently, we presented an effective active support to employment scheme, EASE, which has a strong focus on young people. It supports member states to the transition from crisis job support to creating sustainable future-proof jobs. And last, but certainly not least, the new Erasmus Plus program starting this year is almost double in budget and opportunities, as is the European Solidarity Corps, which will be deployed worldwide. Dear friends, young Europeans, don't listen to the prophets of doom and the birds of ill omen who tell you that you will be the sacrificed generation and that it would be better for you to leave your hometown, your country, or Europe altogether for a better future elsewhere. Let me tell you that they are wrong, and we will prove them wrong. Youth is the lifeblood of democracy in Europe. It is the source of the vitality and energy we need now more than ever to contribute to the sustainable development of our societies all over Europe. We need young people who are committed to building and shaping the world we want to live in. We need young people who carry high the values and ideals that inspire them, those of a more united, prosperous, and generous Europe. Dear friends, the Conference on the Future of Europe was launched at last this week. As you know, the conference is an opportunity to reflect collectively on what type of Europe we want in the future for your future. And I would like to count on your participation and your innovative ideas. Because you are the future of Europe, and tomorrow's Europe simply cannot be built without you. So let us work hand in hand in the challenging months and years to come.
I think those were words, and I think all our participants who are listening to this now, they know that we have participants and we have young people in Europe ready to carry on the values of Europe. I have the pleasure of now introducing the next person to come on stage in this opening session, the President of the Portuguese National Youth Council, João Vidaida.
Thank you, Dúlio. Caro Ministro da Educação, Tiago Brandão Rodrigues, dear Ministerial Youth Representatives, dear Youth Delegates, dear partners, caros parceiros. Before I start in Portuguese, I would like to welcome you all on behalf of the Portuguese National Youth Council to the EU Youth Conference. É com grande prazer que realizamos a Conferência Europeia da Juventude, sob a presidência portuguesa do Conselho da União Europeia. Juntos, o Ministério da Educação e o Conselho Nacional de Juventude têm trabalhado para colocar esta conferência em prática e dar-vos o espaço necessário e útil para discutir o tema eleito deste trio de presidências: Europe for Youth, Youth for Europe, Space for Democracy and Participation, que se centra no Youth Goal Number 9, Space and Democracy for All. Portugal tem colocado a participação dos jovens no topo da sua agenda. Foi em 1998 que realizamos a primeira Conferência Mundial de Ministros responsáveis pela juventude e 21 anos depois convocamos mais de 100 ministros de juventude e delegados de juventude de todo o mundo na Conferência Mundial de Ministros responsáveis pela juventude e o próprio Fórum da Juventude Lisboa mais 21. Esta conferência não é exceção. Queremos continuar a apostar num maior envolvimento dos jovens nas decisões que afetam as suas vidas, quer a nível local, regional, nacional e europeu. Esta conferência também não foge à forma como foi organizada. O Conselho Nacional de Juventude conduziu todo o processo, tendo voz nas decisões ao nível do Ministério e, portanto, conduzindo a este evento que hoje temos. Mas além de garantir a codecisão em todos os setores da sociedade civil que afetam os jovens, queremos ter um objetivo mais elevado e mudar a forma como os jovens participam na democracia. E tornar ainda a democracia mais acessível e atraente para os jovens. Ainda esta semana, nós, o Conselho Nacional de Juventude, lançamos um estudo de participação jovem da eleição do nosso Presidente da República, onde apuramos que cerca de 50% dos jovens que votaram nesta eleição, o que revela uma taxa superior de participação face à taxa de participação da restante sociedade civil. São resultados animadores, dirão, mas de facto para nós não chegam. Somos a geração mais bem preparada de sempre, a geração que mais acesso à informação tem, e ainda assim, aqui, 50% dos jovens decidiram ficar em casa. Isto que se passa em Portugal, passa-se no resto da Europa e no resto do mundo. Esperamos que durante estes 3 dias de trabalho possamos criar um mapa com base nos resultados da Conferência de Juventude da Alemanha, que aborde as muitas barreiras que os jovens ainda enfrentam para participar de uma forma ativa e, sobretudo, significativa. A nossa geração tem estado sucessivamente confinada às crises de emprego, de habitação, de educação, de acesso à saúde e entre muitos outros, que têm dificultado o nosso processo de emancipação e têm vindo a adiar os nossos sonhos. Encontrar na participação o veículo para levar a cabo as mudanças necessárias é algo que também de nós depende, enquanto cidadãos e enquanto parte interessada no processo e principalmente enquanto principais beneficiários dessas mesmas mudanças. Mas também nós, enquanto líderes de juventude, temos também a responsabilidade de criar oportunidades para que nós e os nossos pares sejamos incluídos na construção de soluções conjuntas, seja com os decisores políticos, seja com a sociedade civil. O futuro é nosso e sobre ele devemos decidir nós. Enquanto Conselho Nacional de Juventude, avançar para uma democracia mais inclusiva, através do uso das ferramentas digitais, é de extrema importância. Os jovens são impulsionadores e utilizadores frequentes das tecnologias digitais e precisamos, de facto, de encurtar o afastamento entre os decisores políticos e os jovens e as novas gerações. As tecnologias estão à nossa disposição e devemos aproveitá-las o mais possível. Introduzir, por exemplo, o voto eletrónico, mecanismos de responsabilização para fornecer feedback aos jovens sobre a sua participação num processo político, seja com petições eletrónicas. São estes alguns dos exemplos que devemos começar a testar e a experimentar e, sobretudo, a implementar. Queremos que, através da Hackathon Solve the Gap, que está a acontecer como um evento paralelo à Conferência Europeia de Juventude, e com quem se vão envolver mais tarde a discutir algumas das ideias que estas equipas que participam nesta Hackathon têm, que esta Hackathon nos mova na direção a essa precisa digitalização dos jovens através da sua participação. Eu, como Presidente do Conselho Nacional de Juventude, estou confiante de que iremos alcançar grandes resultados ao longo da Conferência de Juventude da União Europeia, com base nos resultados, como disse, da presidência alemã. Estou certo que diante de nós encontramos pessoas com diferentes responsabilidades, mas fundamentalmente muitos jovens que fazem parte da geração que vai liderar o futuro. Vamos ajudar-nos uns aos outros para construir o nosso próprio futuro. Obrigado e aproveitem esta conferência e desejo a todos que tenham uma discussão frutífera. Obrigado.
Thank you, João, for also again setting the mood for the conversation and the discussions that we'll be holding in the next couple of days. I think the ideas behind what the National Youth Council is preparing for this conference, as you know, one of the organizations of the European Youth Conference together with the Ministry of Education. And without further ado, I have the honor of presenting the next speaker, which is the Portuguese Minister of Education, which will be live from Zoom. He'll be speaking with us and intervening in this session as well now from Zoom.
Muito obrigado, Dúlio. Queria também agradecer ao Milo por esta parceria na moderação. Queria começar por cumprimentar o Sr. Vice-Presidente da Comissão Europeia, o nosso tão empenhado quanto constante parceiro, Margaritis Schinas. Queria também agradecer as palavras e a intervenção do nosso parceiro neste momento especial, o João Pedro Videira, com quem já estive esta manhã e que foi recém-eleito Presidente do Conselho Nacional da Juventude, numa notável prova também da vitalidade da participação política jovem. Queria saudar todos os participantes nesta tão importante Conferência da Juventude e desejar dias de boa interação, de bom trabalho e que seja profícua e que seja, acima de tudo, memorável para o futuro próximo. Mais uma vez, e não será certamente a última, queria que todos possam ser bem-vindos a Portugal, à presidência portuguesa do Conselho da União Europeia e, no seu âmbito, um dos mais importantes eventos, aqueles que coloca toda a juventude da União Europeia em conferência e em conversação constante. Faço votos que esta conferência, no seu modo, no seu conteúdo, possa influenciar a Conferência sobre o Futuro da Europa, que como cidadão europeu e como governante de um Estado-membro, que presida ao Conselho da União, aplaudo que arranque agora para discutir o nosso futuro comum. Voltando agora a esta conferência, nós demos as mãos e damos as mãos ao CNJ, ao Conselho Nacional da Juventude, para dar mais voz aos jovens dentro de toda a União e ao diálogo que estes mesmos jovens estabelecem no seu seio com quem tem o poder, também por eles delegado, de por eles decidir, esperando nós aqui incrementar também com esta conferência e passar de por eles decidir para o de com eles decidir. E esse também é um exercício que fazemos na organização e nesta conferência. Como disse já, esta manhã e esta tarde construímos juntos, na verdade, um espaço, mas também um tempo para a participação de todos os jovens no desenho, na planificação, na execução e na avaliação de políticas que têm como sujeito as suas pessoas e, acima de tudo, como objeto as suas vidas. E queria começar também, aqui e agora, por honrar a posição de poder que ocupo, prestando-vos contas. Desde logo, prestar-vos contas sobre as principais prioridades da presidência portuguesa no domínio da juventude. Continuamos o trabalho em torno do Corpo Europeu de Solidariedade, como disse o Sr. Vice-Presidente da Comissão Europeia, um programa para a juventude de que ela não abdica e faz muitíssimo bem em não abdicar, digo eu. Pretendemos organizar também o lançamento europeu conjunto do Erasmus+, e do Corpo Europeu de Solidariedade, no dia 18 de junho, em Viana do Castelo, e gostaríamos de poder contar com a vossa presença, quer seja ela virtual ou física, nesse momento de celebração. E eu sinto esse momento de forma especial, uma vez que no início deste século usufrui também do programa Erasmus, estando um ano letivo inteiro fora de Portugal a estudar. Outra prioridade da presidência portuguesa no domínio da juventude, de maior relevo, prende-se com a vossa maior preocupação aqui em Conferência, a participação dos jovens nos processos de tomada de decisão. Sabemos bem como os jovens estão subrepresentados nos processos de tomada de decisão que os afetam, embora o seu envolvimento seja absolutamente indispensável para a democracia. Temos de, convosco, poder capacitar-vos, poder formar-vos e poder educar-vos para que possam orientar as vossas vidas com êxito e ter também êxito em escrever a vossa voz nos processos de participação e decisão política, sejam eles locais, nacionais, europeus ou globais. Neste contexto e em consonância com as prioridades identificadas na Estratégia da União Europeia para a Juventude 2019-2027, a presidência portuguesa apresentou, no passado dia 12 de janeiro, um projeto de conclusões do Conselho sobre o reforço da governança a vários níveis, ao promover a participação dos jovens em processos de tomada de decisão, sendo que o nosso objetivo é adotar estas conclusões na reunião do Conselho, nos dias 17 e 18 de maio de 2021, no Conselho Educação, Juventude, Cultura e Desporto. Nestes tempos que vivemos, tempos incertos, não poderia deixar de referir aqui o impacto muito negativo da pandemia de Covid-19 no setor da juventude, em particular no que diz respeito às áreas da educação, às áreas do emprego, da mobilidade, aos programas e às atividades destinadas aos jovens, ao acesso dos jovens aos serviços, ao seu bem-estar geral e à participação dos jovens nos processos de tomada de decisão de que aqui já falamos. A União Europeia, os seus Estados-membros, tomaram uma série de medidas e iniciativas de apoio aos jovens e às organizações de juventude. Os jovens beneficiarão, de forma evidente, do mecanismo de recuperação e resiliência e também do novo quadro financeiro plurianual, no âmbito dos quais as instituições europeias alcançaram um acordo no passado mês de dezembro e que representam um enorme esforço financeiro sem precedentes com vista a combater os efeitos da pandemia em todos os domínios de intervenção. Na nossa presidência temos uma abordagem às políticas de juventude efetivamente baseada em direitos e esperamos acolher em Lisboa uma atividade de aprendizagem interpares centrada exatamente nesta matéria. Entre os dias 25 e 27 de maio, esperemos que já presencialmente vamos receber protagonistas, desde investigadores a técnicos, obviamente os delegados de organizações da juventude e de instituições europeias. Todos com palco e tempo para discutirem as políticas de juventude a partir do prisma dos direitos, procurando encontrar formas reais, participadas e expeditas para facilitar o acesso dos jovens a direitos dos pactos, todos aqueles, os económicos, os sociais, os culturais, os educacionais, os civis, os políticos, mas também os chamados direitos da nova geração. Aqui e agora reiteramos o nosso compromisso, o compromisso de Portugal no que à participação dos jovens e ao acesso dos mesmos a direitos diz respeito, em linha com as dinâmicas europeias nesse sentido, espelhada tanto na estratégia da União Europeia para a juventude, quanto, e por que não dizê-lo, da estratégia 2030 do setor da juventude do Conselho da Europa. Não esquecemos a pandemia que ainda tanto nos afeta e continuamos o processo iniciado pela presidência croata, em sincronia com o surgimento da pandemia, para estudar e avaliar o impacto da juventude, das medidas na juventude, das medidas de resposta pandémica, as suas forças e as suas insuficiências. Numa palavra, prosseguimos com todo este caminho e no palco europeu o compromisso alcançado em 2019 na Conferência Mundial de Ministros da Juventude de Lisboa mais 21 de assegurar o direito à participação efetiva dos jovens em todas as fases do processo decisório e em todo o lugar onde há decisão política. Seja esse lugar cada uma das nossas ruas, seja esse lugar o planeta. Aqui, nesta nossa rua digital, onde por estes dias caminhamos, neste país tão real, abrimos o espaço e o tempo à expressão de uma ideia que não poderá alcançar nunca o seu prometido significado sem que nas suas ideias e nas suas ações acabe por levar, acabemos por falar e acabemos por sentir a palavra e o sentimento que aqui hoje nos une e que nunca mais nos pode deixar nas nossas discussões. Essa palavra chama-se Juventude. Obrigado a todos, quero desejar uma excelente conferência e dizer a todos um até já, aproveitem estes dias, discutam, discordem, concordem quando puderem, mas acima de tudo entendam que as nossas diferenças são a maior arma que temos para conseguir consensos e para construirmos também uma Europa unida e a Europa que queremos construir. Com os jovens e pelos jovens. Muito obrigado a todos e bom trabalho.
Thank you, Mr. Minister of Education, Tiago Brandão Rodrigues. Ensuring participation for all, for sure, that's basically the group of words that will be in the mouth of every delegate in this conference. The mood has been set for the conversations to have in the next couple of days. We have one more video to show you. The city of Gaia has prepared a little video to show us. I believe they want to lure us into coming to Gaia once the conditions and the pandemic situation is all worked out. But also I believe that they want to make sure that we feel a little bit more like we were all here in Gaia. So enjoy the video.
Cale, city of Gaia. It is the original name of our country. Portuguese, Portugal. Gaia, a youth-friendly city, where the voice of youth echoes besides borders, where the dreams listen to the sea, understand themselves and become a masterpiece. It burns by the value of our history, heritage, and energy, fueled by the will of living all the passions that make us smile. We embrace the past, but we are the present and the future. We shine for those who taught us the traditions that are the basis of our identity. We build a belonging feeling and our destiny. We add value to dancing, music, literature, and learning. We add knowledge, empowerment, participation, and inclusion. An inspiring, dynamic, and audacious city that develops and humanizes in each opportunity. We are the source that reborn at every morning rise. We pass the world this integrated message of being and belonging. We build trust. We reach for the impossible. We share and we love our city. Nothing for youth without youth. We are the positive change makers. We are all the youths of Gaia. We count on your participation.
We are going to continue the opening session also with a keynote speech from one of the guests that we have invited to be here with us today on the opening of the EU Youth Conference. I would like, before we invite our speaker, I would like to just point out that just as in the previous conference, now we're going to push ourselves as much as we can in order to make sure that this conference is participatory, that this conference offers space for people to join in, share their voice, and ask questions. With the next keynote speaker, we're also going to start offering this. So please, if you have some questions or comments, use the chat on Zoom. I know that there is quite a lot of you also watching us on Facebook. Write your comments on Facebook and we will try to follow up as much as possible. Also, after the keynote speech from our guests, we will offer the space for some of you to join us live in the program and to raise your voice and ask some questions, but also bring in some points on the subject. We are starting now, and from now until lunch on Monday, we are going to be speaking about participation and space for all young people. So let's do that and use this opportunity. I'm going to invite now to join me from Brussels, Ms. Lana Pasic, who is from the EU Council of Europe Youth Partnership. The EU Council of Youth Partnership is a partnership between these two institutions that works a lot on youth policy, youth participation, and youth work. They have a pool of researchers inside their resources, and they use them throughout the whole time, finding out academic research and finding out academic data and outputs that they can share with us on this subject. So I'm going to invite Lana to join us now live with her keynote speech on the subject of strengthening democracy with young people. What is the way forward? Lana, do you hear me?
Yes, thank you, Milos. I hope you can hear me as well.
Perfect. The floor is yours.
Great, thank you so much. So I will start with sharing my screen so that we can have some visuals as well for the presentation. And thank you for the introduction of the partnership. We are glad to be here today at the youth conference, if not in person, but at least virtually. So what do we do at the Youth Partnership and why are we here? As you already said, we work with a triangle of youth research, youth policy, and youth work at the same time, putting young people at the middle. And some of the main themes that we have covered over the years and that we still continue to work on are the participation and democratic citizenship, also social inclusion through different aspects, including participation, but also digitalizations, as well as strengthening youth work. Of course, these are not our only topics, but these are kind of the key pillars of our work. So how do we do this? Milos already mentioned some of our groups of experts. So we have the pool of European youth researchers, which has 35 members and which was renewed earlier this year. And we also have the European Knowledge Center for Youth Policy. So with these two groups, we gather knowledge, we gather data, we gather information about what is happening at European level and what is happening at national level when it comes to the lives and experiences of young people. And we also try to look forward and see what are some of the emerging and new trends and issues that we need to consider to research, to find information about, and to bring that to the attention of policymakers. I have noted also that some of the work on COVID and the impact of COVID was mentioned already at the opening. So one of our main projects last year was to map the impact of COVID-19 on the youth sector, and we have developed the Knowledge Hub. Last year, we also supported both the Council of Europe and the Croatian presidency at the time with the analysis of some of the data that was gathered from the member states. And we are very happy to hear that now this data is being further collected and analyzed by the Portuguese presidency as well. We invite you to have a look at the hub. It also has a section on the youth goal that is discussed through this presidency, the participation. But also it covers some of the other aspects and the impact on young people, and we continue developing it further this year. Some of our other projects that I can mention as well link with not only political participation and democratic citizenship education, but also contribution to the European Youth Work Agenda. And we have developed last year and will be running again this year MOOC on youth work. We also manage and coordinate the European Platform on Learning Mobility. And we have several projects related to youth policy development, youth policy evaluation. And we have worked quite a lot on social inclusion and digitalization of young people. The ways in which we also reach out to young people and youth workers is through the Coyote magazine. And as well as besides for research and publications, we also try to share the information about our work through podcasts and webinars. And here you can see the podcast that is quite closely connected to the topic of this conference, and that is a shrinking civil society space for young people. So what brings us here and how can we strengthen young people's participation in decision-making processes? At the Youth Partnership, we have been working on this topic for several years, but notably in 2019, we held a symposium on youth political participation. And from this symposium, we gathered quite a lot of knowledge and resources in terms of how young people participate in decision-making processes and what is it that motivates young people, because this is often what policymakers ask us, how to increase young people's participation. So firstly, meaningful participation in political, social, and economic life is very important for healthy democracy. And young people's interest in politics and their interest to participate and to shape the agenda and to share their needs and priorities with policymakers is not decreasing. On the contrary, in 2019, Eurobarometer survey shows that it is 77% of young people who were surveyed that engaged in different processes, including political movements, including political parties, unions, through volunteering or through strikes and protests. What has changed, however, when it comes to young people's participation is that the participation is issue-led. It is often short-term and it is less organized. However, the positive side is that it is rapidly evolving, and I will come back to some of the topics and issues that young people engage around. So often we wonder why is it that we should be encouraging young people's participation, and there are various ways in terms of the theory and research that we can look at this. One of the interesting ones for policymakers is the argument of efficiency. That means that young people's perspectives and needs are included in policies, in strategies, in decisions that are made about young people, so that the policy can actually reflect the needs of youth, but also react and provide support where needed. Young people also need to participate in processes for the purposes of empowerment, for learning, for skill development and building their competences, but also learning competences about democratic societies and functioning within democracies. And there's also the argument that is going to be explored further during these couple of months, as well as the rights-based argument. That means that the young people have a right to participate, and therefore they should be included within the decision-making. But what is it that influences young people's participation? As I said, the motivation often depends on equal treatment and opportunity to be heard and to make an impact. That is why young people tend to engage if they feel that they are actually making a difference with their contribution. However, we also have a range of socioeconomic factors that influence how young people engage, as well as which young people engage. And these factors refer to income, education, they refer to the values that young people hold, and also their questions of their organizational membership or membership of political parties. One of the important factors that our research indicates is that of gender. And that of young women's participation, and I invite you also to have a look at our video that we shared earlier this week regarding young women's participation and what are some of the motives and also some of the obstacles for young women's participation in Europe. One of the issues when it comes to gender is also the question of role models in politics and role models in decision making, because the research shows that it is the majority of representatives in national parliaments are male and over 40, which makes it difficult for young women to actually see themselves within these structures. And then there is also the context and the type of democratic environment within which young people can engage. What do we mean by this? The context can often create certain limitations, and this can come from financial resources, these can come from legal limitations on youth organizations and youth activists. And in terms of financial obstacles, this means that the youth organizations might not have the financing needed to engage into decision-making processes, and as well as to function. We know that financing is mainly short-term, and there's a need for more structural support for youth organizations, but also youth movements. In terms of legal limitations, we see that certain administrative obstacles, for example, are making it difficult for youth organizations to actually engage or to function. There are also withdrawals of certain rights and privileges and protections from certain groups of young people, especially when we're thinking about minority groups. And there's also criminalization of youth activism, as we see most young people now engaged through movements and protests, and this is also quite a concern. Then in terms of the context, we can also look at the youth spaces, both physical and virtual, but now also the development of hybrid spaces in which young people participate. And it is important also here to mention that youth spaces or spaces for participation are often gendered, but also may be kind of limited or reserved for certain groups of young people only, which again creates an issue when it comes to the space for participation. When it comes to young people's right to assembly, we did a lot of research at the end of last year on this, and also we have seen that this right of young people is under threat across Europe. Research conducted by the European Youth Forum last year, but also our research does show that youth organizations and young people do fear retribution when they practice their right to assembly. And then we have selective priorities of governments as well that can sometimes limit young people's participation. When we talk about selective priorities, this means that sometimes funding might be reserved for organizations that are supporting service provision, for example, rather than human rights issues. And we are also seeing a decrease when it comes to the funding and inclusion of citizenship education within the curriculums. Okay, so when we speak about participation, we think of it in various ways. So there's a conventional participation that we're kind of used to seeing within representative democracy. And there are various forms of conventional participation, but we also have non-conventional participation or kind of newer forms of engagement for young people. Speaking of conventional participation, this can take form of voting or elections, and this is, I think it was mentioned earlier today with this upcoming study, or the study that is that was done by the Youth Council in Portugal. Then we have also referendums, we have membership in political parties, young people running for office. But conventional participation also can include issues such as signing petitions or participating through the mechanisms that already exist. And these can be youth councils, they can be student unions, parliaments, but also kind of methods for participations and mechanisms such as participatory budgeting. Why do young people choose or not choose to take part in conventional conventional methods of participation in democracy? It is if they do not feel represented, if they do not feel heard, and if they see themselves as invisible within the system, if they think that youth issues are low on political agenda in terms of the priorities, then young people often choose not to practice this type of participation, but to turn to more non-conventional methods. I will mention only one example here of conventional methods, that is the youth councils, and the research shows that the establishment of youth councils at various levels does send an important message to young people that the public authorities do care about their opinions and they do want to hear about their needs and priorities. So I'll have a look now briefly at unconventional youth participation. I already mentioned at the beginning that there are certain issues that are particularly driving this type of participation. And these include mostly climate change. They include questions of gender equality, racial justice, and students' rights. But of course, young people's participation is not limited only to these issues and these questions. Unconventional participation can sometimes often be called do-it-yourself politics because young people might feel disillusioned within the system, and then they choose to do something about it themselves and to share their opinions, needs, and sometimes frustrations. So how can unconventional participation take place? We have seen in recent years a rise in social movements, protests, demonstrations, but these can also take forms of flash mobs, as well as occupation of public property, refusals to cooperate, but also occupation of public spaces. So what are some of the main methods that we need to think of, or main ways in which we should ensure young people's meaningful participation? So here our infographic shows 5 key messages from our upcoming study on youth political participation, which should be published in the coming weeks. And these are the questions such as material support and non-material support, which should be provided by the authorities at various levels. Then ensuring that there is transparency and accountability within the processes, and that this must include the trust, as well as understanding the roles that different actors can play in this process. This also involves power sharing, so involving young people within the power sharing structures and giving them authority and voice to share their needs. And then there's also a question of open information and communication, and providing up-to-date information and communication to young people, as well as youth-focused conferences such as this one that we are at today. Okay, so what are the ways to identify meaningful youth political participation and the activities? Here is a brief checklist that I will not go into detail on, but I invite you to have a look at our website. It should be there very soon, and there are more information, more details about what can different actors in the field look at when they're thinking about young people's political participation. So besides for these 5 main issues, what are some of the other topics or other concerns that decision makers need to take into consideration when it comes to young people's participation? So besides for these 5, there's also the need for safe spaces. I already mentioned it earlier, both physical and virtual. And there is particular need to pay attention to inclusion of young people, especially young women, in conventional representative democracies such as political parties as well as parliaments, but again, not only young women, but all groups of young people. And there's also need to include youth movements into the discussion, as movements are an important channel for young people to voice their needs and concerns. One of the additional issues is the need for destigmatization and decriminalization of youth activists, and this is also related with the question of provision of space, but also legal limitations that sometimes can be placed on youth participation. So maybe to close with some of the materials that we have developed over the years and some of the materials that are upcoming on which this presentation is based. These are the studies on youth political participation that we have worked on throughout last year, and a shorter version of insights, which will be a youth-friendly version of the publication, but also a version that those who do not have time to read the 100-page report can look at. We have the video on young women's participation, but also research on young people's access to rights, access to assembly, and also research on shrinking space for democratic participation of young people. We also have some interesting animated videos that you can have a look at on our website when it comes to young people's participation and how to meaningfully engage youth. So I will close it here. I will stop sharing and go back to Milos for any questions or comments.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lana. Thank you for the presentation. This has been quite a lot of information. I would say that it's a great start when it comes to the narrative part of what we are going to be discussing the next 3 days. There has been a lot of points that were tackled there, which are linked also with the targets and the main discussions that we're going to have in the next days. We already have a question coming from the audience. We have Anastasia, which is going to join us live with a question, and then we'll have some space for you to follow up. But afterwards, we are going to also offer some more space for new people to join us with questions. So Anastasia, you can take the floor and ask your question to Lana.
Yes, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
That's great. First of all, thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm currently attending. Yes, can you hear me?
Now we can hear you again. We lost you for a moment.
Oh, okay. So I was saying that it's a great opportunity to even virtually attend this conference. My name is Anastasia. I come from Cyprus, and I would like to ask Lana, first of all, thank you for the presentation, Lana. It was very insightful. My question concerns what you said before about the 2019 survey. That showed that 77% of young people participate in some kind of political action, such as movements, volunteering, protests, etc. And my question is, basically, is this, let's say, is this statistic on a general EU level? So what are there major differences between the different EU members? Because I think that would be very interesting to see and to go into detail, let's say. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anastasia. I will encourage the other participants to raise some questions inside the chat, and then Dure is going to talk with you if you would like to also take the floor. And now, Lana, back to you.
Thank you, Milos, and thank you, Anastasia, for the question. So the research and the statistics I referred to are from Eurobarometer survey, and it is run, of course, across the member states. And you can find their different results depending on the country. Of course, 77% is the average for the EU, but it also includes, it is also based on a particular sample of young people who responded to the survey. And it does include a range of activities, as I said, not only participation in politics or structures, but also activities such as volunteering or protests. And depending on how states define also youth political participation or participation within decision making, some of these might or might not be considered at national level as participation mechanisms. So I invite you to have a look at the Eurobarometer, but also on our website, there is a summary of the results.
Thank you very much, Lana. I see that we have another question. So I'm going to just check with Ross if he would like to join us live, or if not, we can follow up with the question. So Ross, would you like to join us and raise your question? Might take some time always because we are in our program needs some time before the person can actually join us with audio and camera. So Ross, would you like to join in, or we can read the question? Hi, Ross.
Hello. No, I had a question about sort of how the COVID-19 pandemic has sort of affected youth participation. Obviously, with the increased restrictions and lockdowns, it can create a digital barrier for young people to engage in politics, particularly if they feel unsafe engaging. So I wonder, obviously it might be a bit early for statistics, but how has that affected young people engaging in politics, and what sort of ways is the European sort of Union and also organized countries sort of combating that to keep participation sort of high in general?
Thank you, Ross. So Lana, back at you. So is there some data on COVID already and how it affects young people's participating?
So I invite you to have a look at our COVID Knowledge Hub on the impact on young people, where we have gathered some of the resources. We have personally not done research on the statistics, but we have noted that, of course, there has been a change in terms of young people's engagement, and we are seeing the change from obviously the physical spaces towards more digital and virtual spaces that have been affected. But at the same time, although it was not quite expected, we also saw that young people were taking to the streets during this time, and also that young people were engaging in different ways of participation through different solidarity actions throughout the pandemic. This is still, I know it seems like a long time since it's a year now already, but when it comes to long-term research and its impact, this is quite a short time still to produce the statistics on that. But we do hope to have more on that soon, and we'll be updating the hub as the latest research comes, and we'll have more on that on our pages.
Thank you very much, Lana. I'm going to encourage the participants to raise some more questions until we wait to have one question. It's a tricky one. It's something that we always go back to when it comes to the question on participation. You showed several factors that actually influence the participation of young people, but we know that we have limited resources. So what do you think? Should we try to work on all of the factors at the same time, or you have come with the research to some kind of data that shows us a step-by-step approach on what should be the first investment that you would do in order to achieve this meaningful participation that you talked about?
So a tricky question, and of course also the one that very much depends on the context in which young people are participating. So our study on meaningful youth political participation looks at participation in democracies, in democratic societies. However, democracies also differ. So in countries where there are legal restrictions on youth participation, these of course should be the first priority of actions. We also need to think of the funding for youth organizations and young people to take part in activities. And to think of youth spaces and provision of youth spaces, both physical and virtual. And hopefully we will have a chance to work in the face-to-face format as well, where this can be revived. But I think one of the issues as well that we have been tackling when it comes to young people's participation for decades now is the question of inclusion, and not only reaching out to different categories of young people, but also engaging them. And I think considering the fact that in order to ensure that all young people are represented and their views are included in different processes, we need to think of social inclusion and how to engage young women, to engage young people coming from minority groups, etc. But this, of course, all depends on the national context.
I think that this is the question that the participants of this conference are going to go back to a lot. There is a lot at stake. We see that there is different forms of participation. And in this, in Youth Goal 9, we speak a lot in the democratic participation from decision-making, but also in some other spaces. And as the Youth Goal says, we want to create space and participation for all. There is also a very practical question on the space on the presentation. The presentation that Lana showed has a lot of data on it, but this presentation we are going to upload on the conference website. So make sure that you log in with your credentials on the conference website, and then we will upload the presentation there after the end of the session, where you can see all this data that Lana presented and all the links of the research that has been done so far. I see that we have another question that came from Jade, if I say the name correctly. So Jade, if you would like to join us live to ask the question, and then with that, slowly we are going to be closing the space for questions and our keynote speaker discussion. So Jade.
Yeah, hello. I was wondering, has youth participation improved or disproved since the COVID-19 pandemic began? And do you think that after the pandemic lessons and restrictions ease, will we still be able to participate virtually, or will it go back to purely physical events?
Thank you. Lana, what are your thoughts on the question? So how would participation look like after the, ideally soon, the end of the global pandemic?
We all hope that this time is going to come very soon. But I think as much as we are all missing meeting people face to face and interacting, and I think this year has showed that there is no replacement for face to face activities, even though technology allows us to meet and exchange and to share. So I think, yes, young people's participation will change in terms of going back to the physical spaces and interactions. But we also have to be realistic that there is no going back in terms of the technology as well. And the digital changes and digitalization have started long before COVID. This situation has just forced us to kind of speed up our digital lives and realities. And we'll be looking as well more into the digital participation of young people. And I know that Hackathon as a side event will also be looking at digital spaces. We did a study in 2019 on social inclusion and digitalization that tackles participation as well. So this is not something new. Participation in digital spaces has been happening for quite some time. There was a lot of discussion and interest into how to bring it back to the physical space. But now I guess we'll have to deal with that in the coming months, hopefully.
Yes, I think that we all can agree that we also, through the youth conferences that we have organized too so far in this kind of setting, we have seen what are the positive and negative effects, because the main idea of these conferences is actually to show on how we can practice participation of young people. We'll go with the last question from Daniel. Daniel wants to ask a bit on the non-conventional ways of participation that you mentioned. So Daniel, you can take the floor to follow up with the question with Lana.
Hello, guys. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Thank you very much, Milos. So thank you very much, Lana, for this awesome presentation and for all the details that you provided us. And my question was about the fact that you mentioned the positive ways regarding youth participation and, for example, participating in political protests. But I also wanted to ask you about the dark side of it in connection with the COVID-19 crisis, because what we could see in these previous months that young people could be attracted by different protests against government restrictions in this regard. So my question is, should we worry about this kind of youth participation and how the youth could be radicalized by protests in this field?
Thank you very much, Daniel. Now I pass the floor back to Lana to follow up on the question.
This has been a concern for quite some years as well in Europe. It is not a new research topic. Certainly, we have done a lot of research on radicalization as well, starting already in, well, I think the latest one was in 2017. But what this year has shown us is that there is a greater polarization within our societies at all levels. And radicalization is one of its aspects. We are seeing polarization also in terms of the socioeconomic status, in terms of beliefs, in terms of the values. And this, of course, is of concern to all research and practice and policy. And this is something that we are looking at, and we'll be looking in more closely in the coming months and years when it comes to research. But as I said, this has also been a concern for policymakers for quite some time. Some of the let's say ways forward that we have seen through previous research on radicalization is that we need to think of building resilience of young people and also including youth voices at different levels, different discussions, but also kind of trying to focus on how to make sure that there is a meaningful and respectful dialogue between not only young people, but also all generations in our society. I mean, we're also seeing a generational rift happening at the same time. So there's so many levels of polarization that we need to consider. But it's certainly not something that we can forget about. And this crisis has showed us that there is more work to be done.
Thank you very much, Lana. And then we are very looking forward to see what will come up from the work from the EU Council of Europe Youth Partnership, because you do have a different view from us, which are the youth organizations, the people that are involved as practitioners, because you have this additional element in the, as you said, in the triangle of research, and this is why this data is always super interesting for us. And I think it gave a very nice base for what is going to come up in the next 3 days as discussion. Before I close up, I would like to give you just the floor for a couple of minutes, so for some last comments that you would like to give us before we move on to the next step with our program.
Thank you, Milos. Again, perhaps to direct you back to our website and our social media, where we do share some of the findings and results, and to think about these processes. We're always happy also to hear from young people and from different actors in the field in terms of what are some of the upcoming priorities for research and some of the new needs for us to take into considerations. So I very much look forward to the rest of the conference and the findings and the discussions of the groups, yeah, I can't wait to see how that is going to feed into our further research results as well.
Thank you very much, Lana. Thank you for the nice inputs. This has been just a small glimpse of what our participants are going to be doing in the next 3 days. We have more than 150 participants that are going to be working for 3 days on summing up results from consultation that has been done with more than 10,000 young Europeans. Our goal this weekend will be to come up with actions and see on how we can move on from what it has given to us as data from the research. With this, I would like to close the official opening and the space where we are going to be also being broadcasted live. We would like to thank you very much for following. We would like to invite you in the next live sessions that are going to be on the same Facebook page where you have been following now. For the participants that maybe have followed the stream on live through Facebook, I will encourage you to go back to the conference website and join us through there, because we are going to continue with the program on the conference, and we are going to give you detailed information on the next session. Thank you very much for everyone for following, and we hope to see you in these big numbers also in the next days of the conference.